Have you been wondering how to build a successful strategy with open source for your company? Or why would you invest in open source projects when you can use the code for free? Are you an open source maintainer on the edge of burnout? Or a newcomer who's too intimidated to take the first steps and get involved? Maybe you're not a code developer and you think that there's no place for you in the open source ecosystem. You're not alone. My name is Ildiko Vancha, and this is the My Open Source Experience podcast, where my guests and I share our open source journeys with all the successes, the struggles, and joyful moments. Find the answers to your questions and dilemmas, and more importantly, join us and be part of the community. Hello, everyone, and welcome back on the My Open Source Experience podcast. Whether you are a long-term follower or a newcomer on the podcast, I'm very excited that you are here with me to celebrate another milestone for the podcast because we just reached the finale episode of Season 3. I know. Already, it is crazy to think about because last September 2025 was just here when the third season kicked off, and I still had a co-host at that time, Phil Robb. But this January in 2026, the podcast switched over into a new journey where I became the only single host of the podcast, and I have been really enjoying this journey, and I still every day feel very fortunate that I can do this podcast and bring you a lot of new content. For example, in Season 3, we talked about the telecommunications and the automotive industries, which are both full of companies who are starting to explore open source, free and open source software, as well as the communities more and more closely, which is really exciting to see. We talked a little bit about law and licenses and open program offices who don't just look into code, but also look into some tooling like AI and what open AI is or open source AI is. Then we also talked about diversity and inclusion in open source communities. And for example, I had a podcast episode with Shua Khan, which is very near and dear to my heart because we talked about women in tech and women in open source. And we really focused on our upbringing and childhoods to get a little bit of understanding how we got to the point in our careers where we are and how that journey has been and how much our childhoods and our early life experiences have influenced our choices and approaches later on. So I really, really loved Season 3. And I am sad that this season is closing, but I'm really excited about Season 4 already. And those of you who are following me for a longer time, you already know to come back to the channel where you follow the podcast weekly because there will be shorter segments, new content airing every single week in the break before Season 4 starts up again sometime in September in 2026. And if you also want to meet people and not just look at the screen or listen to the podcast, there are a lot of open source events around the globe. And as a tradition, I again have a little collection of events to look out for. And if you type this into Google looking for open source events or give the job to your favorite AI agent, then you will find even more out there that you can attend. And don't just think about big conferences, but also think about smaller meetups. And if there would not be any in the area where you are, then maybe this is your sign to start your own. So what are the events to look out for and attend? The first that I will mention is Nerdarla, which will be in Buenos Aires, Argentina in September 22nd till the 26th. This is an event that is very similar to FOSDEM in Europe. It's full of sessions, presentations, workshops. It is a large open source event series put together by volunteers, and really the purpose is to connect with other like-minded people. Another event that is focusing on open source at large is Open Source Summit Europe, which will be in Prague, Czech Republic in October from the 7th till the 9th. And also look out for the co-located events, which usually happen either the day before or the day after the conference. And the call for papers, or CFP, for the Open Source Summit is still open until tomorrow, June 24th. All things open later in October from the 19th till the 20th will bring you to the United States in Raleigh, North Carolina. That is, again, another event that focuses on topics in the open source ecosystem and not just in one particular technology area. Everything Open, which was formerly LinuxConf Australia, usually happens in January. So while the dates are not set yet, I would expect that to happen in January 2027 in Canberra, Australia. FOSDEM that I mentioned before, it always happens in Brussels, Belgium, another volunteer-organized event that happens at a university. It is a big, beautiful chaos. Thousands of people are attending every year. It's one of my favorite open source conferences. And in 2027, it will happen on February 6th and 7th, which will be, as always, a weekend. But look out for all the co-located events throughout the week in Brussels, because FOSDEM grew into a whole open source week of events. And it's not just in Brussels, the week of FOSDEM, because, for example, State of OpenCon will happen on February 9th and 10th in London, the UK. And if you're looking for open source conferences in a bit more concentrated in one technology area, then I would recommend to check out Open Infra Summit Asia, which will be happening on September 7th and 8th in Shanghai, China, and it will be co-located with KubeCon and Cloud Native Con Asia and PyTorch Asia. So there will be a lot of exciting things happening throughout those 2 days in Shanghai. Then KubeCon in North America, it will happen in November from the 9th till the 12th in Salt Lake City, Utah. And the Europe occasion of the event will be in Barcelona, Spain in March from the 15th till the 18th in 2027. Reflecting back on the third season of the My Open Source Experience podcast, I picked a few segments with my guests throughout this season to explore open source from various perspectives, and that includes the corporate view, the individual view, and also how to make progress in the community where you are involved in the areas that are important to you and probably others as well. So first, I have a segment for you with Stormy Peters and Phil Robb to talk about some of the challenges that we all see in the open source ecosystem, and especially focusing on organizations within a company, like an open source program office or a review board. So those groups in companies who are reviewing which projects to get involved in and how to contribute to those. So Stormy and Phil are talking about their experiences at HPE and how the company and they approached to review what will be submitted upstream and how. I just wanted to check if you remember any big challenge that you needed to overcome in the context of open source within the company, like helping any person or department understand what it was, or any other roadblock that you had to remove in order for the company to be able to efficiently work with open source, or any big success story along similar lines.
I think we've mentioned most of the big ones that I can remember.
I think the one that I would add on is the challenge of, again, when you're introducing something new, is the product team that is 2 days from shipping and they realize that they have to go through the open source review board because they've got open source and they need to ship and they did something wrong. And so we're like, You can't do that. You're going to have to change your code, but we're shipping in 2 days." No, no, you're not. Yes, yes, we're shipping in 2 days. And then we have our lawyer call their lawyer and then they fix it before they ship.
Well, when we created the open source review board process, the goal really was not so usually the engineers or software developers were super excited about open source, and then it was management that had the concern. And so the goal was not to slow things down. So we really wanted to have a process that anyone could get the review and their answer within a week. So if a software developer was really excited and wanted to use this piece of open source software, within a week they could have an answer, so that we didn't hold up the development process at that point. Now, if they tell you about it 2 days before they're shipping, that's the week's not going to help, right? But the idea was like it should be so smooth that it's not an impediment to using technology and to building product.
Yeah, and we always phrased it as a backstop, right? We were just a backstop, right? All the process to take care of everything should happen inside the product team, so our review would be quick and move, and it would be done very quickly because they did do the right thing. But when we were starting, it was getting them coming to us at the right point in their process, so that if there was something of issue, they had the opportunity to react without messing up their schedule. That was, I think, part of one of the early learnings. But again, that was back in the day, and I'm sure all OSPOs and software product creation is totally smooth now.
I think even then we were figuring out what things could be fast tracked. Like if it's this license or this license, just automatic approval. I think there's probably a lot more of that in OSPOs these days. Like it's less about licenses because we understand some known ones. So, it's probably like if you're using one we don't know, here's extra steps.
Yeah, and it is changing very much to vulnerabilities and security posture are
Yeah.
they rightfully so are taking the priority step.
One interesting thing in this segment was that in the past, like, for example, roughly 13 years ago, when I started to get involved in open source on behalf of Ericsson, licenses were one of the big things that everyone was scratching their heads about, and not just the GPL license, but even Apache 2, whether or not it's a good idea for the company to get involved and share code and contribute and invest in the open source project upstream. But what Phil and Stormy were pointing out about security and vulnerabilities, those areas just got into the spotlight because of AI and how AI speeds up both the code generation and with that sometimes also the bug generation, and also finding either bogus or real vulnerabilities. And all these have to be reviewed and attended to. So that is something that has been keeping the open source communities very busy. And if you are watching the space, then all the fixed vulnerabilities are also starting to keep the companies downstream very busy. So as we talk about companies, open source program offices are organizations or small groups within companies in different departments, depending on the company and the size of the company and the focus of the company. Everyone has a little bit of a different approach, how to create an OSPO, or some companies call them open program offices because it's not always about the source code. I mentioned AI before, for example, how to approach AI and the use of AI. Sometimes that is coupled together with the approach toward free and open source software. So in that regard, having an OSPO is very important. However, when companies need to cut costs, then OSPOs and some of the open source engagement related roles and groups are the first to reduce or fully eliminate. So, in this upcoming segment, Wolfgang Gehring talks about why your company should have an OSPO if it doesn't have it yet, and when should you have it? Right now. I think I catch you referring to OSPO level at one point. Does that mean that your company has an OSPO as open source program office or inner source program office? So you have like a central organization who deals with open source in a more coordinated, strategic way?
Absolutely. So, I mean, to make it slightly more complicated, so at Mercedes-Benz Tech Innovation, we have an proper OSPO, properly named Open Source Program Office, that takes care of that. And then at the group level, we have the FOSS Center of Competence, which basically is the same. It just has a different title, yeah. But that's where we get together regularly, so at least once a week, and talk about strategic stuff with regards to open source. And so at the group level, we have all the concerned parties. We have the IT and the R&D department with the car IT people and the legal department, and some subsidiaries and stuff. Yes, so absolutely. And we've had that FOSS Center of Competence from the beginning of our open source endeavors. And I think it's really important, so now at our subsidiary MBTI, for short, Mercedes-Benz Tech Innovation, MBTI, okay? We founded, we had a group before, but now we founded a proper OSPO a couple of years ago. And I think it's very helpful. And I mean, in my opinion, if you're serious about open source at your company, you need an OSPO, whether you name it OSPO or COC or whatever, but otherwise you're not making full use of the potential of open source. Again, if somebody in the company here and somebody in the company over there does something with FOSS, and you're not talking to each other, then you're not doing it in a concerted fashion, and you're also not mitigating all the risks, and you're not going towards basically one direction. And so I think that's very much needed. Absolutely.
So for you, it worked out well to even like from the starting point have like a center organization who is responsible for both figuring things out as well as I assume sharing all that with the rest of the company. Well, as much as you can, because we just established that when you have a large company to share news with people, it doesn't always carry to every single person right away. So it takes time for the news to trickle down. But you say that it is kind of a game changer and the way to go to have a central organization.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I mean, we talk to many people, and sometimes there is a person or maybe two people who are like you, ambassadors for open source and inner source in a way, but the company doesn't always have the central organization who these people would be either part of or interacting with. Another example that we saw is like the OSPO being more tied to marketing budget and the marketing department, which doesn't always seem to be working out well, but it sounds like that in case of Mercedes-Benz, you really strongly tie that to technology and R&D and like not just one portion of the company, and even that being marketing, which doesn't really have that much influence over engineering, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen in different companies, literally different organizations, drastically different organizations hosting OSPOs, as well as how high up or how low and embedded inside of the company they are. Like at Hewlett Packard, back in the early 2000s, I formed their open source program office, and we actually started in the server division because that's where Linux was, and that's what we did. And then we moved to the CTO office, and then we had this joint relationship between the CTO office and the legal department, right? And then I've seen other organizations where it's just under the legal, or others where it's just under the CTO, or sometimes it does stay just within a business. So I've always found that interesting, right? It's like the OSPOs and the centers of competence. They, as you say, the general job description is very similar for that type of organization across different companies. But where they're housed has always been, yeah, they seem to be all kinds of different places.
Yes, I have, talking to OSPOs from other companies, I have made the same experience. I've seen them located in all kinds and parts of the company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always love when people share their experiences on the podcast because the point really isn't us telling you that you have to have an OSPO, but really diving into the why and how an OSPO can help and how people have been going through the process of creating one, experiencing what it can do and how it can do it. And then once having that experience, then realizing that is one of the very important parts and groups of the organization, especially at a company with the size and history of Mercedes-Benz. And when it comes to open source, once a company gets involved and invests time and teams working upstream, then it is also important to look into the individual view and the experiences of individuals. Because I remember when I first got involved in OpenStack, like I was working for Ericsson and our team, well, not just the team where I was working, but many other teams in the project where I was assigned to, we were tasked with deploying, configuring OpenStack and figuring out how it worked and how we can use it in the telecommunications industry as a telecom-focused cloud platform. So how we can shape OpenStack into that bucket to fit well and nicely. And it wasn't a small feat of doing that because 13 years ago, OpenStack wasn't where it is today, even though it was already a mature and very powerful platform. But we had a lot of questions and we're scratching our heads. So even just the ability to be able to see and examine the source code that made a huge difference compared to commercial platforms. But at the same time, having the ability to reach out to the community with any questions that we had that we just couldn't find the answer to anywhere else, that was very, very helpful. So we learned a lot of different skills. And it was both skills around deploying and operating cloud infrastructure, as well as the skill of getting in touch and getting involved in a large and very fast moving open source community like OpenStack. So you have a lot of technical skills and then you have a lot of human skills. And Phil and I had a conversation with Ashan Senevirathne about open source and how Swisscom, where Ashan worked at the time, has been approaching open source and getting involved in open source. And Ashan was telling about his experience being involved in open source communities and how that journey has shaped him and his experience in the telecom industry through the open source ecosystem. Do you remember how the first time was and first experience was when you reached out to people in a community?
Yeah, at the start, reaching out felt quite daunting because it was a well-known project or library, especially on this JavaScript side. But at the same time, when I provided the feedback, it felt quite rewarding how quickly they respond and how quickly you get this responses back, right? So yeah, it was quite nice. I think that's one of the benefits in open source community as well. You have a large group of people, if it's the right project, in a globally or at a global scale, and the way you work with them, and also with the technology that we have now, how quickly people respond and the way they react. Yeah, it's nice.
I'm curious, Ashan. I mean, this was something that, in particular, in past years, I've done a variety of work with university students, and long ago, nobody, meaning 15 years or so, nobody was really engaging at all in open source or even thought much about it.
Mhm.
At least here in the US. Whereas in more recent years, last 5, 7 years, it is more as to what you're describing, where they're starting to engage. I mean, from your experience, what do you think? Did it provide any value to you? Do you still leverage those relationships that you first made in those JavaScript communities or in other communities? Meaning, from a career standpoint, does it ease your ability to be a developer inside of the companies you work for because you have those relationships and you've been fostering them since your university days? And I ask again mostly to help those that are in university recognize that, is there a value in doing that kind of work to further your career later on?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, from my side, it did not add much value on as in like from the relationship point of view, because in where I worked before, and also now it's a different technology stack or different programming language, etc. But it gave me a boost on having this mindset of if you contribute or if you use these open source tools, um, the value that you bring. Um, I think from my view, for the university students right now, it gives them tremendous value if they contribute to the code or to the community. They can maintain their own GitHub like the profile. It's one way of showing that you have contributed or you provided value on a project. Um, yeah, I mean, even at hiring right now, that I looked into GitHub and what people have come sort of like contributed to the code and the style that they use. So it's one way of showcasing your work, right? So it's quite nice in that way.
Yeah, it's kind of like an employer looking at your social media feed, except this is a very technical social
Exactly.
media feed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also to add to this, it wasn't a big thing 10 years back. Like maintaining your GitHub and then and such. But I think now people do look into it, and it has a bigger value, I think, now. Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly say that from Ericsson's point of view and the hiring that I've done. Well, that's the
Yeah,
first place we go is to GitHub.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and also
But
as you mentioned, sorry, as you mentioned that I guess for the 5 to 8 years, if you look back, there are a lot of CNCF, like it's ramping up. There's a lot of like AI projects like coming in a very small time frames, and also it's quickly evolving. So you need to have this phase within the open source community. So there's no way going back on it. So you definitely, it's a must, I think. Yeah.
Did you feel that like these interactions with open source communities and the work in open source communities that it helped with building skills that companies are looking for? So even if it's not like the network that you built that helped you land a job, but when it comes to, further benefits of being involved in open source communities, like the ability to talk to people, like to build out a network, because very often, like in tech, uh networking in the social sense means that you're able to have a conversation with people who are not within your own company, and with like large companies, even within the company, reaching out to someone is not always straightforward. So do you feel that your involvement in open source that helped with building those crucial skills?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. As I mentioned, I think it gives you this right mindset of like uh, the the networking aspect as well as the collaboration aspect. So rather than being this closed source person, so you have this open source mindset. Um, yeah, it brings value, and also it also helps you to if you're part of a big organization, it also helps you to bring these values into the organization aspect as well. So for an example, um, in an organization, in a telco environment, oftentimes we have this so-called silos. So if you have the right mindset to on networking, or having this code shareability aspect, etc., or providing feedback, it also helps you in an organization, right? And not just the wider community. So it also helps within a large organization.
Ashan pointed out a lot of important things, but what I would like to highlight is the ability to build your resume through open source. So if you're still at school, or just graduated, or haven't graduated yet, but you are already thinking about what you're going to do once you do, then it is the perfect time to get involved in open source projects that are interesting for you. Because once you get involved and start working in the community, then you can build your resume, because you will have experience working with the technology, and you will have the experience working with people, and you will usually find communities where there are people from all around the globe being involved. So you can say that you have experience working with a multinational group of people. You can navigate multiple cultures, and you can navigate people working in different time zones. You can navigate working with people you never met before in person or online or in any shape or form. So there are a lot of skills that you will learn, and your resume will be online, because once you start and your code changes get merged, then anyone can check out your work. They can check out the way how you're communicating. So your resume will just build itself. And in today's job market, where AI is taking over the entry level roles, being able to build skills and have a real life experience, that is just even more invaluable than it's ever been. And when it comes to communication, just because you speak the same language as the other people do, it doesn't really mean that you will have an easy way to communicate with everyone. And therefore, many cases in many communities, there are conflicts, because people often are not on the same page. They don't talk about exactly the same thing, even though they think they are. And then some of the conversations sometimes become a little bit heated. So it's not that easy to navigate talking to a group of people, especially if they are strangers. And I must tell you, if you don't have the experience yet, whether you're working with an open source community or a team within a company, this experience is practically the exact same. There are always conflicts that are often hard to resolve, especially if no one really has good communication skills and experience. I had the opportunity to talk to Daniel Stenberg. He's been maintaining the Curl project for over 30 years. Yes, you heard that right. Curl is over 3 decades old. It's celebrating its anniversary this year in 2026. It is really exciting. If you haven't seen the episode with Daniel yet, then please and go and check it out right now, right away. It's a great episode. And in this segment that I chose for the season finale is a segment where Daniel and I talk about communication, because being the leader and one of the core maintainers of an open source project for 30 years, that means that Daniel has been doing something right in terms of how to communicate with people, newcomers and other folks who became maintainers over time, to be able to maintain and keep the project thriving. And I learned a lot of good practices from Daniel in this little segment. And now I'm very excited that you get to learn some tips and tricks yourself as well. Did you ever have any particular methods or practices or ways of communicating when you encountered any conflict in the community, or was it always situational and specific to the conversation that people were having?
I've not had a lot of that. As a talking about leading by example, one of the things, for example, I often just try to do when it comes to communication about the project is often just to talk about we instead of I or you. When we do things in the project, what do we want it to do, and what is our work is doing? And that, I think, is really helpful, because it also makes it a us problem and not a you or it's not an individual contributor here. So it's not your problem is this when you're a contributor, is our problem, because it's actually a problem for the project, right? It's not the single contributor. And I think that is often helps, because it's sort of it takes away the focus on the individual actually working on the problem right now, because it's actually not that person's problem. Maybe again, if it's something we do to improve the project, it's actually not anyone's individual problem. It's a challenge for the project, right? For all of us, whoever that is. I mean, at least more than one. Anyone who cares about the project. So, and I think that is often helpful, because then it also makes you feel as part of it, right? It's not not singled out or blamed as an individual. So that is one way I often try to, when I do communication myself, even though it might be me writing it and me, I'm going to fix it, I'm going to do everything along the way, but I find it much better to talk about us, we, and our things, rather than my patch and my fix and my thoughts here, because it makes it much better. I don't know, it sounds much better in when everyone sort of, yeah, then it's us, then it's, in the big team, not otherwise.
So by shifting from I to we, it sounds like that you're sort of intentionally shifting a conversation towards this community mindset and the common goal mindset.
Yeah, it's a little bit like you said, exactly. It's a subtle way to just shift it towards what we're all working for, rather than individual differences.
I love that. I'm going to try that too. And we'll see how that works with the communities that I work with.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's actually kind of fun, because when someone introduces it, starts a discussion, or you join the discussion when people are talking about my stuff, your stuff, it actually shifts the conversation pretty nicely. When you talk about, suddenly you enter the discussion and you talk about our stuff, or we should do this, or because then you join them, and suddenly take sides, or go over to their side, perhaps, and it's our problem now. We should fix it like this, or I think we should do it, or whatever. So I think it's a pretty good way to do it. Of course, it doesn't work always, and
But it sounds like you have good experiences with this method, and it seems like that it either resolved or prevented heated conversations that you were involved in.
yes, I think so. But I think also there are many different things that makes it work. I also often just dive in, if we discuss something, perhaps maybe I'll just jump in, and let's make a test version. I can just make my approach in code, or whatever, show everyone or something, because sometimes it becomes too much talking, and maybe too theoretical too. So sometimes it's better to just, we go with one way and we try that. And because very often it doesn't matter, even if you debate something, way A or way B, which is the best. And then in the end, whatever version you do, it's not going to be like A or B in the end anyway, because once you have that version, you start to realize, wait a minute, this is not ideal. We should also polish it a little bit, and we should add this little tweak, and maybe pull that back a little bit. So we will end up with something A, B, C like anyway in the end. So sometimes it's better to just go with one of them, take the next step, and then iterate from that, because that's how we do it anyway. And we're just going to constantly iterate over time until the end of days anyway.
So it sounds like that sustaining a nice, welcoming environment, it's important to use an inclusive language. And also, it sounds like it's a good way to keep up that environment to be action oriented. And I remember at one point you were saying that the spec and the actual code and how it works, they usually deviate. So it also sounds like that if people can have a rough consensus that the idea is not bad, then after that point, it's probably better to start working on it and seeing how it works and
Absolutely.
tweak it rather than argue on the spec forever until it reads perfect.
It's more like, if no one is violently against it, then you can move forward. and also talking about then inclusive language and everything. I think in a world with so many open source projects and only so many developers in the world, it's a rough competition for developers, right? So it's important to make your corner of the world feel somewhat comfortable and fun, right? Because again, people would just leave and find another open source project instead if you make it a hostile or otherwise bad place to be. So you want it to feel good. And I want it too, right? I don't want to be part of a team where people are unpleasant towards each other. So
I really loved the technique where Daniel said that it really made a difference to switch the language and the way how he communicated from I to we. Like how we are going to solve something, or this is our problem and not just my problem, and this is what I want, and this is what I want to do, or I will do, or this is the problem I need to be solved. Because once you start talking about things as a we problem or something that we need to solve, then you're starting to reinforce the thought in others that this project that you're all working on is everybody's project and it's everybody's priority to maintain and shape and improve it moving forward. And when it comes to communication, one of the things that most often create the conflict is priorities, setting the priorities, tracking the priorities, and making sure that people who are either established contributors or newcomers know what those priorities are, where to find them, how to track them. And for example, when it comes to priorities, especially in the AI age where generating and creating and writing code is so much faster than it has been, as well as AI agents tend to write a bit more verbose code. So the code changes are getting longer and longer, which means that reviewing them is becoming a bit more complicated than what it was in the past. So reviewer bandwidth is getting a little bit lower because the work has been increasing. Most often, project maintainers can only get to the priority items when it comes to feature development, and then also looking into bug fixes based on the severity. Obviously, security vulnerabilities are the highest priority, and then you have critical, high priority, medium, and then lower impact bugs. Reviewers are going by this ranking and trying to review as many things as they can. Getting something onto the priority list requires a lot of things, but one of these things is good communication skills. And I have a segment for you with the conversation I had with Mike Gifford. And in this segment, we are building a little bit on the episode that aired just 2 weeks ago. And we are talking about how accessibility became a focus area in the Drupal community. And Mike talks about his experience pushing this through so that it could make its way into the priority list for the project at large. What did it take to reach that point where accessibility became a non-negotiable? I remember that you mentioned that there was leadership buy-in. How did you get that buy-in?
I mean, I think partly that it came from me just being tenacious, like always just taking the time to go off and to post a few issues and or to update issues, like to make sure that things didn't die on the vine. Like that being tenacious was critical to going off and seeing it. People don't think about the basic functionality of how most open source projects work. Because most open source projects have an issue queue, and people go off and make an issue, and then it falls to the bottom of the issue. And if you don't respond to it, it goes deeper and deeper and deeper in the issue queue. And then suddenly it's like it's been 5 years and nobody remembers. Whereas if you can find ways to bump it back up to the top and say, oh, here's a new article that touches on this. If you can find ways to provide additional evidence that supports the argument for this case, if you can provide other examples of content management systems or similar tools, like if the competition is adopting the thing you're arguing for, like that makes a pretty good use case to go off and have it be implemented here. Like, why can't we do it? Because WordPress does it. Like, are we not as cool as WordPress? Like that type of thing can really help move a community ahead. And I used all of those techniques to try and move it ahead and get adoption. But frankly, I think that knowing Dries and Angie and others, like these are good people who want to do the right thing, and they're involved in open source because they very much believe in supporting people and supporting the community and realizing that the community has people with disabilities in it. Like we all make mistakes, and we don't like it's a good practice to go off and build accessible from the start. But most of us just we start projects and then we realize, oh yeah, we forgot about disability, and then we sort of like jump back and trying to get that. The sooner we can do that, the better. But very few of us are trying to go off and from the start build an accessible event management tool, for example. Like people have done that, and there's amazing people like Carl Groves that have done that, but it's not that's not how most projects get started.
I share that experience, although that was a feature development example in OpenStack, but it was a cross-project work where you had to do work in multiple projects, and that was non-trivial. And I can confirm that when you're persistent and you're not going away just because something doesn't get done in a release cycle, then at one point people will get to the point where they realize that it's less work and effort to actually do the thing and get it through the finish line than send you away repeatedly, because I was not going to go away until the thing was done. And then the thing got done. It took years, but the thing got done. So I definitely have the same experience of that, being tenacious and being there and keep reminding people. And then eventually the conversation turns from why do you need this over to how can we make this work?
Right.
And obviously that my experience was a feature development, and what you were working on, that was a whole big issue for a lot of people. In this segment, we both shared this experience that if you're tenacious and consistent, then over time, you're able to communicate why something is important, why something is a priority for you, and why that something should probably be a priority for the project as well that you are working with. And especially if it is an area like accessibility, which for Drupal as an engine and framework in the web space, that means that if you do it right in Drupal, then it will be right on all the websites that are powered by Drupal. So that was a very, very important step, not just for Mike and the Drupal community, but all the people out there who are having some kind of a disability that prevents them to access content, either because they are visually impaired or they have a hearing problem. You can check out all kinds of examples of disabilities and things that affect people's ability to access a web page and the content on the web page in the episode that aired with Mike. And this is what I had for you today, a little bit of a bouquet of segments with guests from season 3. And in terms of season 4, I will just say that we will obviously talk about AI and AI in open source and AI use in open source communities, because it's getting more and more prominent. So it is very important to have folks talk about their experiences, good or bad, to help others figure out what the best way might be to utilize and rely on AI, because in my current experience, everyone is just trying to figure this out and it's a trial and error process. So everyone is a little bit uncertain, but we are moving forward and doing the best that we can. And beyond that, we will also talk about things like the Cyber Resilience Act, which is coming to action, and talk about research and the relationship between research and open source communities, and how a research project made a difference in the Linux kernel community and ecosystem. And we will also talk a little bit about global governance and what governments around the globe are doing in the area of open source and how they are leveraging and utilizing all the good things and the benefits that free and open source software can offer, along with the communities that are working on these projects. So season 4 will start up in September in 2026. And in the meantime, check back weekly for the short segments. And I hope you will really enjoy that new content that will air in the break. And stay tuned, because season 4 will arrive to you sooner than you would think. And with that, that's all, folks. That was our episode for today. What did resonate with you the most? What new ideas, strategy, or useful tips did you hear today? Or you have a comment or follow-up question to ask? Comment on the episode below or start a conversation on your favorite social media platform. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast so others can discover it too. And stay tuned because the next episode is just around the corner.